But yeah, that's clear enough, isn't it? Okay. I've done the shortened version for you. This one, I do enjoy this one. And the reason being is, I don't know if anyone's ever seen the documentary, and there's a book called In the Footsteps of Alexander the Great. And the guy, Michael Wood, maybe it's because he's a Mancunian, I'm not sure, but he goes around the world and follows the footsteps of Alexander the Great and goes to all the various places. And quite a few years ago, probably 15 more years ago when the kids were very small, we were reading about William Tyndale and the Reformation, and because we were over in Holland a lot, we sort of took places out, and on the way to camp down to Bath, we went there a little bit early to try and find and go and search out all the places where William Tyndale lived, where he said certain things. So all the photographs, or most of them, are ones that we've taken. And then we went to places in Holland as well, which we'll go. There's only one place left to tick off in Germany. But can we have the intro, please, Rue? This was nice and loud. I'm in the mood now, I'm all excited. Okay. And then the slideshow, please, Ruth. Oh, pointers. Have you put it back, John, after last week? Yeah. You ready, Ruth? I don't want to lose the momentum now. That's it. Yeah, there we go. So looking at the churches in Revelation, we're just going to look at this. You can go along the churches, and the various sort of time frames seem to be the best choices, really, as you go through the unveiling of history. The bit that we're just going to have a look at, really, is this time of the Reformation. So around about the 1500s. Have a little look before that. But this is sort of just to put it into the bigger picture, really, of Revelation. And I saw, that was it. You can read those yourself. So in 323 AD, a monk named Jerome translated the Bible into Latin, and it was a language of the upper class priesthood. And the Bible was locked away in monasteries, and nobody really could access it. So that was the aim of the Catholic Church, was to keep it locked up and not let people read it, because if you read it, you might start questioning some of the things that they were up to. So the story of William Tyndale, we're going to have a little look through. And looking at the story of William Tyndale gives us that story, which is the thread through a particular time, only a short period of time in history. But from his story, you can sort of use it as a memory aid, really, to put other things on and attach them to. But for me, it just gave me a bit of a foothold into that time period and the history. We took that picture. I'll say that on all of them now. That was going to be another video. Oh, did that work? That's upside that down. We'll leave that one for now. That was a shortened version. It didn't work before. So the papal bull. So this what 600 AD, it had been decreed that only the language permissible for the scriptures was in Latin, and few could read, let alone read Latin, including the clergy as well, the priests. Some clergy apparently couldn't recite, the Lord's Prayer, Our Father, and some didn't know how many commandments there were in the Old Testament. It was, the level of knowledge was very poor for scriptural wise because of the language, which made it hidden. Wycliffe, he was one of the first ones, so we're looking at sort of just before we get to William Tyndale in the late 1400s. He translated Jerome's Bible of 323, Latin Vulgate, into English, but now by that time then the Old Testament from Hebrew was Hebrew to Greek to Latin to English. So you had 4 opportunities for error and for people to put their interpretation into it. The New Testament was slightly better, but that was from Greek to Latin to English. So you had all these layers coming in, which is every layer is a potential for error and for interpretation. Wycliffe, one of his famous statements was, "Would ye that ye gospel slept?" So his sort of message really was to revive the gospel and to get it out to people. And that's really the times of the Reformation, was to take the Bible that was hidden and to expose it and to share it and to allow people to read it and have access to it. One of the big sayings at the time was that Wycliffe had a particular problem with was God's flesh, Christ's own blood. Wycliffe said it was nothing more than a symbol, just as we do today. But the Catholic Church said that body and that bread and that cup, when you took it, turned into, it's called transubstantiation, and it turned into the physical flesh and blood of Jesus. And that's why my mum, when I used to go to church, said, you don't chew it, because it's like biting the Lord. So you had to let it dissolve in your mouth. Otherwise, it was sacrilege. The Lollards. So just a very brief history of some of these people. The Lollards were called the mumblers, and they would apparently go, imagine like, cloak with the hoodies of the old times. They'd go around with the hoodies on. But instead of smashing your windows and robbing your car, what they used to do was read scriptures. If only the hoodies would do that today. But they were hunted out at every opportunity and persecuted. The only power deemed strong enough to purify such sin was fire. So it was the stake. So they were captured. They would take a scripture around, go into the local villages and read, and just read a page of Paul or of the New Testament. They were called Bible men, which was used to insult them originally. There was pits, if you go around the country, called Lollard pits, and that was where they burned them, and then they threw them into those pits. A bale of hay in those days was said to be able to buy a letter of St. Paul, so it cost a lot of money. I think that was like a month's wages to buy one letter to be able to read. So there was a thirst for people to read the gospel, to read the Bible. This is a great story of. That's it. That's him there. That's Wycliffe. 40 years after his death, 1428, his body and his coffin, 40 years later, were taken up. And because of the things that he spoke of, he was declared a heretic, because it had been declared by Pope Innocent III in 1199 to be treason against God. Its vileness was said to render Sodom and Gomorrah pure, and they had words like pona sensus, punishment of the senses, fire, or pona damned, damnation into life everlasting. So the idea of burning the body was so that it couldn't enter the kingdom of God, because they had no body to go with in that sense. The church couldn't carry out the burning, because the church doesn't shed blood. So Pope Lucas III passed the inconvenience by decreeing that unrepentant heretics handed over to the secular authorities for sentence and execution. So history repeating itself. It reminds me a little bit of the crucifixion being handed over. Nothing to do with us, but you can do it for us. You can do our dirty work. So the 40 years after his death, his bones were dug up, and then he was put on trial, and his silence was taken as an admission of guilt. So because he didn't defend himself very well, they then apparently ceremonially defrocked him. So they put the frock on him, his gown, everything, defrocked him, took it off him, and then where he would have dipped his hand in the holy water, and so they scraped his fingers, the bones, to get the holy water out of them, scraped his forehead, scraped his chest bone, and then burned his bones, and then cast his, you can sense the hatred going into it, and then they cast his bones into the river, and while cursing his bones and cursing the ashes, and just sent them out. But the Christians at the time, the people said, well, all the rivers run into the sea, and the sea distributes to the whole world. So that they turned it around and said, so his message now will go out to the whole world. Try to put, that's what you call putting a positive spin on it. But the hatred was there. That's the important part. And in every good story, there's an arch enemy, and this is William Tyndale's arch enemy to the day of his end. Really, was Sir Thomas More. This man we'll have a look at later. We don't quite know what Tyndale looked like. There's some artist impressions, but we get a bit of an insight into his character, which is quite good, really. His humility. We read of him and he goes up on books and presentate, but at the time, no one really knew him, and it was many years after that anyone even credited him for the work that he did. So we move forward to John Gooseflesh. That's a strange name. But he was the son of a paper and vellum skin calf maker, and apparently he was just idling away, and he had the wood carvings, and he got some ink on him, and it dropped off and landed on some of the cloth, and then made an imprint, and then he changed his name to John Gutenberg, and then went on to change the world with printing. It was apparently discovered in China previous to that, but the Gutenberg Bible of 1455 was written in Latin, and it was the first book published on what was the first book published on the internet? It was the Gutenberg Bible of 1455. Shouldn't have given the answer first, but that was the first thing published on the internet as well, which is interesting. There's a lot more to that. You could look into that, each one of these slides in much more detail. But that was the book. That was one of Tyndale's. Some of the carvings. One of the descriptions was that they were quite crude, or not crude, but quite simple, but quite energetic and sort of dynamic in some of them. We've seen them they're in the John Rylands Library. Again, just to put that forward. But you can go and ask to just open one and read one, which is incredible. Very rare, considering the amount that were printed. So, Old Hurst Farm, Slimbridge. If you want to know where these places are, make some notes, and you can head down there on your way to camp. Just come off the M5, and it's all that area around there that William Tyndale lived. So Hitchins for security. Battles, War of the Roses was going on around this time as well. The early life of Tyndale, nobody really knows much of his early life, but we know that he had an older brother, Edward, and a younger brother, John. And this is possibly where he was born, most probable place. So we went and took pictures of it. State of the church at the time was growing up. The church had sunk to levels of corruption and depravity, which are hard to believe. You've got one of these here. This is a copy of one of the indulgences. So the priest would have printed indulgences. You could write your sins on, put your money next to it, and you're away. A good earner for the church. So you had a list of all the different sins with the prices next to them. So you've got confession is what you'd done, indulgences were what you were going to do, in the future. And combined with the printing press, it was a license to print money, literally. And that then added to all of those, plus all the songs of the carts going through for every gold coin that hits the back of the coffers, a soul springs out of purgatory. That was another one of the songs. I can't remember the tune. This is one just to sort of highlight the depths of depravity at the time was Pope Alexander VI. And Rodrigo de Borgia, his name, bought the title of Pope from his uncle and then became Pope Alexander VI. And that you've got that sort of there. He had 3 illegitimate children, and his daughter, I'm sure they'd be moved, but was called Lucretia Borgia, and she was forced into 3 marriages before she was 21. So this gives you an indication of who they were. 3 marriages before she was 21. The first one, she was forced to divorce, and then the second one was murdered, and she remained unhappily married to the third. But lots of people, lots of men that were known to be with her were found dead the next morning as well. So that's some of the, gives you an idea of the family of the church at the time. Then you've got Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon in 1509. Initially a mood of optimism, but then we know that story as well. Divorced, beheaded and died. Oh, horrible histories ones, aren't they? But Anne Boleyn was a supporter of the Reformation. It's said, some places have said that she actually had a copy of William Tyndale's New Testament and a copy of his other book, which was Obedience of a Christian Man, which he wrote. So back to William Tyndale. He went to Oxford College. Should have said, where did William Tyndale go to college? Oh. He finished his schooling, gained a degree at Oxford, and there was 1,000 students, 6,000 books in Latin and only 60 in English when he was there, which is incredible. He studied grammar, logic and rhetoric, and some of the books were so valuable that they had him chained up so they couldn't steal them. There was a guy there called Thomas Wolsey who was into the papal side of things, and Tyndale's nickname for him was Wolsey. Apparently he called him the wily wolf, a raging sea and a shipwreck of England. So that even when he was younger, he could see the things that were going on around him with the church and the Bible, and he had the opportunity which he took. Rhetoric means the study of technique of using language effectively to influence, and that can be good or bad. So that was really his skill set. 84% of the New Testament is Tyndale's work. Probably 75% of the Old Testament, because he didn't get a chance to finish it all, and very little changed. Though there were some significant changes. It's not an anti-King James, but a lot of the King James Bible we have in front of us comes direct from his translation of one man, which is incredible, really. And then others sort of took that and looked into it. Tyndale went to Oxford in 1506, graduated, Master of Arts 3 years later, and he scorned the academic sophistry of the day and improved himself for this purpose, really. Then we can look at the Dutch side of it. I won't go into too much detail, but all their weaknesses in the church, he was quoted as saying, "I will bear with this church until I find a better one." That was Erasmus. So he was around at the time as well. All these people we see monuments for, and they all tie into this period. He translated the Latin to Greek, and that was part of the European side of things as well. Little Sodbury Manor, we weren't allowed in there because we were Mancunian. That's the only, because we were Mancunian and a plasterer. They didn't like Mancunian plasterers. I think they just had it in for us. No, after obtaining his master's degree, he returned to Gloucester, settling into this place. And this is the house where he said a famous saying, which we'll look at on the next slide. But we went there, tried to get up. We drove up this big parkway, and there was a woman with her corgis walking around the garden. And I went in and jumped out the car. I said, we had the roof rack on. The car was had a few dents in it. We had the roof rack on, jumped out and said, "We've made it. Is this the place where William Tyndale said his famous statement?" She said, "Yes, 500 years ago." "And now it's private property and we'd like you to leave." So there's no chance of having a look in the library then. So the idea was, if God spares my life many years now, I will cause the boy that driveth the plough to know more of the scriptures than thou dost. That was when he was having dinner with a priest or one of the clergy, and he was talking. He realised that they didn't know the scriptures. So that was his aim, which we're going to look at. The Bible, it was the words released from Latin, understood and desired by the people that had that hunger. And we know the Bible makes no mention of the papacy, hierarchies. It's silent on celibacy, no transubstantiation, no cults of saints or relics, but rather warned against. No promise of pilgrimage or cash for forgiving sin, and on and on and on. No purgatory. So what if he understood and could read those scriptures and could see a complete disparage between the two? The Bible, a read Bible, was a danger to the church. That's the important thing. As we go through, we'll see that there was ships going up and down the channel to stop Bibles getting into England, to stop these ideas of the Bible getting in. And there was controversy over many things, but really that was the main point. So what did William? This gives you an insight into William Tyndale's character. He moved to London, took a translation in Greek and an oration by Socrates. He booked an appointment with the Bishop Tunstall, and he went there and he asked, and he said, "Can I translate the Bible into English?" So that was his naivety, really, that comes through. So he went to all these people and said, "Do you mind if I translate the Bible?" And they said no, to say the least. He was refused, but because of his education, because of his Oxford upbringing, that sort of stuff, they decided not to follow him up and burn him at the time, but rather he found a bit of refuge in people who were more sympathetic to him. So, realising that, he then went to Cologne, and he'd never step foot inside England again. But he spent his time there on the run, living in lofts as a poor man, going from place to place, people that would look after him and give him a bit of food here and there. He lived on goodwill and donations, wishing to read the Bible in English. Their lives too, anyone that was associated with him became in danger, and we'll see a few as we go through. Martin Luther, 95 Theses. He's preaching ideas. We know this fairly well. That he tried, and on the good side of him, to try and get the words right, he would travel to slaughterhouses and all kinds of places to try and get the right. His intention was to try and get the Bible so German, he said, that you'd even think Moses was German. That was his intent. But one thing I'd not really come across until fairly recently was his hatred for the Jews. And he set out 7 sort of main principles. He tried to convert them, and when not that many of them converted to Christianity, some of the things he said was set fire to the synagogues and schools, done in honour of the Lord. I'm not sure how much he read of the New Testament, but he said, "I advise that their houses be razed and destroyed, all their writings be burned, and anyone found preaching be put to death or loss of life." What was it? He said that they should have no free access on the highways, for they have no business. What was the 6th one? All their cash and treasures and gold and silver should be taken from them. And it says they should be given an axe, a flail and a spade, and a distaff and a spindle, and be made to work the land. And when you think of, years later with the Holocaust, we know Hitler was quite into all his history and that sort of stuff as well. And it's sort of quite close to his writings with Mein Kampf and that sort of stuff for those things which really sort of came to pass. So we see that there's nothing new under the sun. So in 1526, let's move on. Cologne fragment. We'll try and just touch on a couple of little stories as we go through. But this one, he'd gone to in Cologne to a friend. I won't read all the names out for time, but he was in there sort of having the Bibles printed. Somebody had spying on him, had said he was there. He had all these Bibles being printed. So in Worms, this is the one where, if you can imagine him with a few Bibles under his arm, running down, running through the streets, really, because the printing press was raided, and he managed to just escape, really, by the skin of his teeth from there as well. So everywhere he went, he was on the hunt. He was being hunted, really. Being vilified, hunted, and chased down. And while he's doing this, he's also translating the Bible in the evening. Smuggling into England, that Pastor Dennis mentioned earlier. Ships and bales, copies smuggled down the Rhine, wrapped in bales of cloth. First print of 3,000 copies survive. There was one that was sold in 1994. Someone found it in the loft. After I found that, I went and had a quick check in the loft, even though the house was a little bit newer than that, but I thought it's worth a try. And it was sold, the British Library bought it for £1 million. That would be about nearly £2 million in today's money. And then there was all, we think false reporting, that was all there at the time. People putting out false accusations and saying it's a terrible translation, you shouldn't use it, and all that sort of stuff was all there as well. Ships running up and down. Burning of the books. This is another one. Tried to boil it down to some of the famous sayings. Outside of St. Paul's, the fires of the burning of the books were said to have burned for 2 days. And people said, what do you think of that? All the books being burned. And Tyndale said, well, he said, it's because he will burn them, Tyndale said. I am the gladder, for I'll get more money from him for these books. He says, to bring myself out of debt, and the whole world shall cry out, because upon the burning of God's word, and then overplus of the money shall remain to me, and shall make me more studious to correct the said testament, so the newly imprinted the same again. So he was able to sort of reframe it really and move it round. He said, the bishop got the book, so he burned them. Packingham, who was the guy, he got the thanks for getting them, but Tyndale got the money so he could reinvest it in getting more Bibles out. So people would say, what are you doing burning Bibles? And then they'd start to want to know, why are you burning Bibles? What's in the Bibles? That was the idea of it. Anyone spot who's that? And that. See little Alicia there. So as we moved to Antwerp, it was well known in these times for the printing presses, north of Paris, seaport, handled 4 times more tonnage than London apparently at the time. Strong links with England due to the wool at the time as well. There again, see the 3 of them. I know, I'll have to leave that one in. Look at that, look what I organised there. Very romantic. And then he got shipwrecked. So he had all these books, he's got all these expensive books, and he's translated them. So what was the last thing you want to do is get shipwrecked. And that's where he got shipwrecked. Lost pretty much everything. Details of his losses at sea. He had to start again with his translations. He was on the Dutch coast. It cost him both time, money. Fox's Book of Martyrs, the Fox from that guy who wrote that, he said he had to start over again. Lost all of it. So what book would you translate after you'd just been shipwrecked? He translated Jonah just after that. So Thomas More, let's have a little look at him. I read a few bits on him, and apparently he used to get a few Christians. So if he invited you around for dinner, you'd have your nice dinner, and then he'd say, right, get a few of the Christians out from the dungeon, and we'll go and give them a good flogging in the garden. That was their dessert. That was their after dinner entertainment, was to flog people in the garden. That was the kind of hierarchical sort of people we're looking at. And he wrote the book, which lots of people write songs about, called Utopia, which is incredible. He wrote all of that, and then he wrote 7.5 million words of hatred against William Tyndale in particular. The hatred against him, and it was said that he funded the people that were pursuing him unto the day of his capture. I won't go through the things with Thomas More, but he refused to go along, and he got beheaded himself. But the hatred from him. Thomas More was responsible for a number of executions and murders as well. So the execution of heretics was considered appropriate apparently for the time. Flames were said to cleanse the world of heretics' evil. Smithfield Market and those sorts of places was where they did a lot of that in England, which is incredible really. So we had a look to see if we could find these particular streets, because what happened was he was in relative safety there, and he met a man called Henry Phillips who was in debt. He'd gone from England, he was in debt, and not a very nice man. And the story sort of goes that he was in Antwerp with him, and he befriended Tyndale, got to know him, and then he said to him one night, let's go out for dinner, I'm paying. And as he went out into the streets, the guy Henry had set up the police to capture him, and that's how he got captured, through being betrayed really. And it's said that records of the time say that he was in disbelief. He was just shocked that he'd been betrayed, really. It was more the hurt of being betrayed that he believed him. But the guy that did it was said to have been funded by Thomas More as well. Even when Thomas More was, was in prison at the time, he was still had that vehement sort of hatred for Tyndale. So it was down sort of similar, these types of streets where he would have been captured. Then we followed him all the way through. So we went to Antwerp, and then we followed him through to Vilvoorde, down in Belgium, about an hour and a half trip. But it was worth the trip. Tried to find the site where he was then captured in Antwerp, and he was taken down to Vilvoorde Castle, where he was kept for 18 months. And in that area, the castle is now gone, and it's now a penitentiary, a prison down there. And there's a fire station on the site of the old castle, and it's where the Bastille was. And the conditions were found from a letter that Tyndale wrote. That was it earlier on. And that's the last bit of the castle. That's all that's left of it, just by the lake there. That's where his bones were said to have been thrown into or put into. The trial, I won't go through all of that, but the trial, actually, let's just have just one there. Just to read it, hope you don't mind. Can't see what time it was, but just to give an idea of who he was, and his desire with the scriptures, which has always stuck with me. He wrote a letter while he was in prison, and he says, "To His Excellency the Marquis of Bergen, Governor of Vilvoorde Prison, from William Tyndale, Master of Arts, rightful worshipful Sir, I believe you have the knowledge of what may have been decided about me, wherefore I have request of your Lordship by the Lord Jesus Christ that if I am to remain here through the winter, you will have the kindness to allow me the commissioner to send me from the goods of mine own, which he has a warmer cap, for I suffer greatly from the cold and am afflicted by perpetual catarrh." And then he asked for a few other things like his overcoat and various things. But he said, the bit that's always stuck with me is he said, "But most of all, I beg and beseech you, your clemency, to be urgent with the commissioner, that he will kindly permit me to have the Hebrew Bible and the Hebrew grammar and the Hebrew dictionary, that I pass my time in study." So even though he knew he was going to get, that's all he wanted to do, was just sit there and read and look at the scriptures. In return, may you obtain what you most desire for the salvation of your soul. But whatever your decision is, he goes on to say, before the winter, I'll wait for it. But he just wanted a lamp so he could read in the evenings. The trial was one of those, what you call a chess trial. One story of his denied involvement. That was one. Yeah, there was a story of one of them that in England that had been funding him. Apparently he was interviewed in England. I couldn't find the exact name from the book, but they went round, the police went round and said, "Oh, have you been funding William Tyndale?" He said, No, I've got nothing to do with it, not about me. So they left him, and apparently his conscience overrode him that evening, that he just went out the next day just with the Bible, shouting it and screaming it in the streets, and then he was eventually burned then. And they weren't, they were quite well-to-do people as well that were able to fund them. This was supposed to be another video. Upside down.
To the Marquis of Bergen.
This was from the movie. You all want to get home now and watch the movie, don't you? That's just to give you a little inkling to see. But he was found guilty of heresy, condemned to death, and was taken to the stake and strangled and burned on October 6, 1536. His last words before he was executed had been, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes," and the executioner was overcome, trying to strangle him. And one of the things in them days as well was trying to strangle him was also symbolic of, if you think about the hatred towards him, burning wasn't enough. They had to strangle him to silence him and burn him. It was trying to get everything in one before they had their way, really. But apparently they bundled it, and he never quite died, and it wasn't particularly nice the way it was. The site, I thought I'd change that. So this was where the site was. We got to walk. We couldn't really work out the spot exactly, but walked around the very nice cathedral where the unfortunate act took place. And then we know that Henry VIII, we'll go through now, but it's really the King James Bible comes forward from that. Various monuments around the place in Holland and England that we've managed to sort of have a look at when we've been out. And if you're driving along the M5 on your way to camp, on the left-hand side is a tower on one of the hills, and that's the William Tyndale Tower. Doesn't take long to go up there. Nearly finished now. One of the guys who's written extensively about William Tyndale, so he was a considerable linguist with knowledge of 8 languages, and he brought to his own language a rare understanding, and we're the better for it with our translation of it. Then the King James Bible that we have went through various, translations, but the bulk of it comes from Tyndale. And just a few of the quotes as we finish now will be, in the football it might be, refuse to give up the ghost. EastEnders, salt of the earth. What was it? You can't put words in my mouth. A law unto herself, etc. What were the other ones? Turn the world upside down. God forbid. Take root. Filthy lucre. With God all things are possible. The signs of the times where 2 or 3 are gathered together. They made light of it. Eat, drink, and be merry. The scales fell from his eyes, full of good works, the powers that be, etc., etc. And it was a number of them that would only came out a good number of years afterwards, where anyone actually said, "Oh, this is where it came from." Most of the people that translated it just took the credit, really. But it's the thing, really, I suppose, which is good in the story, really, is that he did all that while his love of it, really, while he's on the run. He's being vilified, he's being hated, he's poor in all those places, but his love really for the scriptures that comes out when he was in the prison of just enjoying the scriptures that we benefit from, and are blessed to have. So, the Bible that we have has got a long story. Every one of those slides you could look into the various things from it. That's the one there. And then, thank you. We'll have the lights, please, Mark. Quick, and then we'll see who's awake. We'll see how many casualties we've got. I was going to leave the lights on, but if you don't want to listen, go to sleep. Yeah, okay, we'll leave it there.